On today's World Insight, Middle East hostilities take a turn for the worse as Israel fights in two fronts following Iran's missile barrage. With the UN Security Council in emergency session over the spiraling conflict, China seeks calm to defuse simmering tensions. But how open are Mideast players to going back on a diplomatic, political track to fix differences?
And welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Lebanon forces have clashed with Israeli troops which set foot on a southern Lebanese town. The Lebanese army said in a statement lately. The clashes came a day after Iran fired about 180 missiles into Israel on Tuesday. Iran said the missile strike was retaliation for Israel's series of targeted attacks in Lebanon in recent weeks. The recent hostilities have sparked fears of spiraling conflict. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the Jewish state will retaliate. The Biden administration reiterated the U.S. support for Israel while pressing for a Middle East peace. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council sought an emergency meeting on the escalating Middle East situation. On Wednesday, China expressed concern over the sharp rise in tensions and called on the international community, especially major countries, to play a constructive role. How dangerous is the Middle East escalation of attacks? What are the chances the region could be engulfed in an all-out war? For answers, let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Beijing, Rong Ying, Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. In Shanghai, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of East China Normal University. In London, Gambar Nadari, journalist and political commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, the latest development is Israel struck back at Lebanon, and we see the escalation of tensions continue. From London, Mr. Nadari, your assessment of what's likely to be next?
Well, this is a game of losers, and losers always do what's best for them, which is just continuing the status quo, and that's precisely what is going on right now. Israel has failed to defeat Hamas and Hezbollah, let alone Iran and the Houthis in Yemen. Iran at the same time has failed to become the so-called sole regional power with a lot of influence among other countries, because other countries refuse to get on board and help Iran to somehow control and bring under control Israel and help the so-called resistance movement in places like Lebanon and Palestine. At the same time, the resistant groups of Hamas, Houthis and Hezbollah have failed to stop the Israeli troops on their tracks. We hear now they are even attacking the heart of Beirut. As I told you, this is the game of losers. And I'm afraid as long as we have the hardliners in power, the situation will persist.
Are you saying the hardliner in Israel or hardliners also regarding different non-state sector?
Everywhere, are the hardliners in Palestine, in Iran, in Israel, because what they are doing is what they have been doing it in the past, which is just continuing the status quo. I'm afraid they refuse to sit down and talk and resolve the problem right now. Why? Because they are not in control. The moderates are not in control in any of these countries.
Professor Mahoney, many are asking the question, is this going to be the very beginning, once again, of a escalated tension in the region, probably comparable to the war in the Middle East earlier?
Well, there have been competing analyses since the start of the conflict in Gaza, with some asserting that Israel did not have the capacity for a wider war. And if they pushed too hard against Hamas, then this could trigger a wider struggle with Hezbollah and Iran. Now, it was believed that Israel had not really won its last major engagement with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that caution was necessary. However, we've seen no restraint by the Israelis in Gaza. We've seen direct, unprecedented assassinations of the Hezbollah leadership with the bombing in Beirut and the assassination of the Hamas leader in Tehran, in addition to the almost unbelievable attack via pager bombs, indicating that Israel was not only able to kill or wound many in Hezbollah's command structure, it was also directly monitoring communications. Now, given the surge in Netanyahu's popularity in Israel, given the accommodation and active support of the U.S. government, given the tactical successes, and I agree with my colleague in London that this is a competition of losers versus losers. But nevertheless, I think that Netanyahu is buoyed by his rise from the ashes, his rebirth in popularity. I don't think this is really about Gaza anymore. I don't think it's really about Israelis being able to return to their houses near the border should the Hezbollah attacks abate. I think Israel is seeing how far it can press this attack, whether or not it can draw Iran into a conflict. And certainly, given the leverage that the Israeli government has over the American government right now, I think he's going to press until he reaches a hard stop or a hard wall somewhere, and he hasn't found that yet.
Mr. Rong, China has urged the UN Security Council to take actions and also to voice their opinions to de-escalate the tension in the region. Now, so far, there are very different opinions, of course, among the members of the Security Council Permanent Five. Your take on that?
It is true. I think possibly we are now, the Middle East is the most dangerous sort of a moment or time in its modern history. I think for almost 1 year, we have been calling upon the immediate ceasefire, seeking political, diplomatic solutions. Unfortunately, it never happened. And now we are seeing an escalation and also spiral escalation into, not only into different countries, but also I bring the two major countries in the region, Israel and Iran, for direct confrontation. Remember, these two countries, not only major sort of power in the region, they all have, nuclear weapons, or in the case of Iran, on the verge of nuclear weapons. So the talk of adventurism, the danger, the risk of miscalculation can cause not only an all-out war in the region, but also, I think, possible, even more consequences. The international community has trying to be helpful, and the UN Security Council too. Unfortunately, I think it seems that more work has to be done, more efforts have to be made. And in this regard, China is calling upon UN Security Council and the United States being the sort of a country that has the influence and the power to be more proactive, to be more responsible, and to make sure that that eventuality would not happen.
We see Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis extremely active, and they seem to have certain kinds of consensus among them, and also Iran plays a central role in terms of how to rally against the latest actions and attacks on the civilians to the Middle East. So how do you see these interesting alliance, which some has been termed it as the axis of resistance, quote unquote?
It wasn't like this because, as you know, the Iranian officials made it clear that they were listening to the advices of the American and European officials that if they don't retaliate against Israel, there would be some kind of ceasefire in Gaza, and that Israel would refuse to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon. So obviously, they waited about 2 months, even more than that. But what happened? Hamas became more. ambitious in its attacks against Hamas, and then it started eliminating the commanders of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Under immense pressure by the hardliners in Iran, the Iranian moderate government collapsed, and the hardliners took the matters into their own hands and forced Iran to retaliate. Why? Because many people in the Middle East, especially Hamas fighters and Hezbollah fighters, were accusing Iran of betraying them, of leaving them alone in the face of Israeli airstrikes. So Iran had no choice but to strike back, and that's precisely what it did a few days ago. I'm afraid because Israel has also promised to retaliate against these missile attacks by Iran, we will see this game of cat and mouse continue.
But we are seeing some very different actions at different directions. For example, the Iranian president having meeting with the visiting Russian Prime Minister. We also see that there are reactions coming from different sides toward Israel. Also, Iran, right after the attacks against some of the targets in Israel, has been saying very clearly Israel should refrain from retaliation. Of course, the latter didn't do so. So a lot of interesting development on different sides. Putting them together, how should we analyze and digest the latest waves of development?
That's a good question. Obviously, what you are telling me is that things are getting out of hand. Things are getting out of hand, and nobody seems to be in control of anything, especially the United States. Israel refuses to listen to America anymore. It says that I'm going to single-handedly take these matters into my own hands, and I am going to strike back at Iran and others in the region. At the same time, Iran says that we waited and waited and waited, but no ceasefire came with help from the West. That's why we had no choice but to react, and that's precisely what we did. And if Israel attacks again, we will retaliate again. So things are getting out of control. Nobody is in charge. Even the traditional influence of Turkey is gone. Turkey is also not doing anything. Why? Because it is working and cooperating with each and every single party in the region. At the same time, Arab countries have no choice but to sit down and watch, because they are under the influence and control of the United States, and they have no choice but to distance themselves from Iran.
We see the U.S. In a way have been rhetorically talking in the press, suggesting it's been talking to Israel. Meanwhile, we also see the U.S. Suggesting it is standing together with Israel, even though the wording have always been changing from time to time. And at the same time, this is all taking place right before the November election in the United States. And at the same time, we also see U.S. relations with some of the big powers in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, been changing. For example, vis-a-vis the relationship with Israel. So how should we also, from the U.S. perspective, putting all of these things together and see what's coming out of this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important to note is that a lot of people point to the October attacks last year by Hamas as being the trigger of this conflict, and I think that's unfair. Certainly, it's what led to the escalations that followed, but I think it's important to remember that according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that Israel in 2023 had already killed 492 Palestinians, including 120 children in the occupied territories, as well as injured more than 12,000 Palestinians. So this was already a significant conflict that was going on, and quite an illegal one, according to the United Nations standards. So, and furthermore, I had been warned by many Middle Eastern diplomats that a war was coming. There was an understanding that Israel was preparing to strike, either because they thought they had a strategic opportunity or because they needed to externalize their internal political problems and create some unity, given the government's struggles that they were having. in Tel Aviv. But that said, what is the role of the U.S.? And certainly we know that the Democrats have tried to play it both ways. On the one hand, part of the party is very pro-Israel, and the other part of the party is very unhappy with what's happening with the genocide in Gaza. And I use the word genocide because that's the word I think is suitable, but also because that's the word that a lot of the Democrats who are angry with the Biden administration likewise embrace. I think we can well ask, given sort of the shock and dismay of that appeared to be on Blinken's face after the bombing in Beirut killed the Hezbollah leadership, whether or not he had been played by Netanyahu. It's clear that Netanyahu doesn't like the Biden administration. It's clear that he favors Trump. And it's also clear that Trump put a lot of this in motion by moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, that he put a lot of it in motion by negotiating the Abraham Accords, and really encouraged Israel to take a free hand in the occupied territories. And the Biden administration really didn't change that, nor did the Biden administration really follow through with efforts to negotiate in good faith with Iran to return to the agreements that had been originally negotiated during the Obama administration. So Iran has been called out. I think Iran has tried to avoid conflict. I'm not sure that the U.S. has really, in good faith, tried to restrain Israel. We certainly know that the United States was warning Israel that Iran was preparing a retaliation. We know that the U.S. has moved resources. So I don't know what the Biden administration really aims to do, but I do know that the U.S. is deeply complicit in what has caused this problem and why it continues.
The U.S. Strategy in the Middle East over the past 2 decades have been changing. For example, particularly since the war in Iraq. And we are seeing the U.S. Building military base, but at the same time will not necessarily, so far, participate as much as it did in the Middle East. How do you see the grand strategy and thinking of changes and transformation, the U.S. role in the Middle East by Washington vis-a-vis the latest events? Once again, that is a gigantic topic, but since we have been discussing all of these for 2 decades now, I guess we have to look at all these different aspects.
In my own analysis, and this requires a significant amount of speculation, I believe that the U.S. is moving back to a Cold War paradigm. I believe that it realized that it was unable to rule the full world after the demise of the Soviet Union, and certainly it met its limits in its conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I see Israel as one of the forward garrisons of the American new Cold War order, at least the one that they want to create. And I think both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have been playing to that overall goal. I think that's probably led by military strategic thinking and not necessarily by politics or ideology or what the Speaker of the House thinks about Jerusalem. So in this case, I think it's clear that the U.S. will stick by Israel, although I think Israel is certainly creating a lot of problems for the Democrats at this time.
Mr. Rong, built on what just Professor Mahoney said about the possible U.S. role and thinking at this moment, given some of the latest important political events back at home, is there a danger that what's going on in the Middle East right now will become an extremely important component of the geopolitics or Cold War 2.0 that some have been warning? For example, between China and the United States, and how the world is likely to be strategically articulated by important powers?
Yeah, I think the danger is always there because when we talk about the grand strategy, geopolitics, as a Chinese sort of analyst, naturally, one is very much following closely about this that shift or the changes of sort of strategy and its impact on on China and the region where the Asia Pacific. I'm not referring to certainly the so-called the pivot, the rebalance, or the Indo-Pacific strategy. But in the meantime, I think China as a sort of rising power, as a country that now increasingly see that a stable and peaceful Middle East serve its fundamental, its strategic interest. And that is exactly the reasons, the backdrop where China has now become more and more proactive in helping the region to achieve peace and stability. And we see that diplomacy, China's Middle East diplomacy has been very active. And by not only, in terms of providing or proposing initiatives, but more importantly, with concrete sort of moves by, providing good offices, for example, helping the Saudis and Irans to achieve reconciliation, and most recently, I think, helping the 14 sort of factions of the Palestinian liberation organizations to achieve that reconciliation. But the idea is that to prepare the ground through first and foremost, I think the Middle East issue would be brought back despite the ongoing crisis, to the right track of political and diplomatic solutions. But most importantly, I think China hopes that with its diplomatic efforts and support by the international community, including the United States, that the two-state solution and would be implemented so that it would provide a long-term sort of a solution to the crisis. Solution to the crisis. Unfortunately, I think it would have to take more, and most importantly, as far as China is concerned, that United States would have to be on the board. So the complexities is a big problem as far as China is concerned.
Given the fact that China has been working closely with Iran and with Russia, emerging economies and developing countries, for example, on the platform of the BRICS, which is likely to celebrate a summit very soon, later this month. What kind of role will China play, particularly at this critical juncture when events are happening very fast and some of the players in the Middle East, such as Iran, have been working with China on platforms such as BRICS for some time already?
Yeah, it is true. I think Iran not only has been working very closely with China and other BRICS members. Iran is now an official member of SCO. Again, I think sort of regional organizations like BRICS and SCO have been playing a very important role. Not only, I think, pushing for their efforts, political and diplomatic solution, but most importantly, I think by bringing together, all the relevant parties so that their views, their voices will be sort of heard and represented. I think on the question related to peace and stability, related to the ongoing conflict like that, the most important thing is that I think the argument or the voice for political solution instead of military sort of a solution. The problem we are having now in the region and vis-a-vis regarding the ongoing crisis conflict is that Israel, unfortunately, despite regardless of the international community, the pressure, the call for ceasefire, for returning to the political solution is being intransigently working along this line. And it seems that nobody can stop them. And that is the problem. I think that's why China, not only at the BRICS, the SCO, and most importantly, that we see in the recent emerging session of UN Security Council on the ongoing crisis in Lebanon, China has called on the international community, the UN Security Council in particular, to act right now, coming up, sending out a clear, unequivocal voice, a message that the war, the conflict have to be stopped, ceasefire have to come. This is something I think China is working for. This is something I think China, not only as Russia, Iran, and others, the global community, global South in particular, are all on board. This is the voice, I think. This is the call. I think that will in the long will make a difference.
Okay. Well, before we go, we are seeing events happening very fast. There are likely to be tensions escalated before any kinds of signs of calming down. So what do you perceive are some of the most important events for the near future that could have an impact on the evolution of events over there in the Middle East? Let's go to Mr. Nadari first, very briefly.
Well, I'm afraid Israel has plans to attack Iran's nuclear installations. At the same time, America said, we are not going to help you. Iran knows very well that other infrastructure in its across the country will also come under attack. This also gives a free hand to the hardliners in Iran to send even more ballistic missiles, super ballistic missiles to Israel. Okay. At the same time, those who believe in peace and security do not launch attacks against Israel. I'm afraid Hamas did just that. Hezbollah is also doing that. Houthis are also doing that, which means no party right now is willing or prepared to sit down for talks. And that clearly translates into the fact that as long as America says that I'm not going to interfere, I'm only going to send money and weapons to Israel, things are going to continue to escalate in the near future.
I see.
Why? Because we don't have, as I told you, moderates in any of these countries that have now come to their senses that after decades of violence, the time has already come to end the violence.
I see.
That's why I believe that the things is going to get worse than what we have seen so far.
Mr. Rong, your take, briefly, please.
Yeah, most likely, I think Israel will be responding, but then all depends on the scale and extent of that response and what Iran will be, respond again. So the danger, the risk of that cycle, vicious cycle, will take place, unfortunately.
Professor Mahoney, final words also from you.
I think that Israel knows that it has until November 4th to do whatever it wants. That the United States won't take a decisive action until the presidential election has taken place. And at that point, I think we'll see the true color of the Biden administration.
Thank you so much. Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Gambar Nadari, Rong Ying. Appreciate it, gentlemen. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.